What were the major events of the American Revolution? Leading up to the American Revolution, the Stamp Act, which taxed all paper products, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence were major events. During the Revolution, the Battle of Saratoga was significant because the Patriots won and it allowed Ben Franklin to convince the French to provide more support. The Battle of Yorktown was a major event, since it was the last major battle of the war. What started the Revolutionary War in 1776? The colonists felt that the Stamp Act and other acts that followed were unjust, as they did not have representation in Parliament. Tensions continued to rise over the years until the two sides came to blows at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. What is the timeline of the American Revolution? The timeline of the American Revolution includes the French and Indian War that began in 1754 and increased the British war debt, thus leading the British to tax the colonists to help pay the debt. The passage of the Stamp Act in 1765 and the Townshend Acts in 1767 increased tensions between the colonists and the British. British troops that occupied Boston increased tensions and led to the Boston Massacre in 1770 and in 1773 the Boston Tea Party and finally the first shots of the American Revolution at the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. The road to the American Revolution. Events leading to the Revolutionary War centered around tensions that had been rising for years. From the mid-1700s, the colonists had mostly been able to run local governments without much interference from the British. However, that began to change largely as a result of the French and Indian War, which left Britain with increased debt. Since the British sent troops who fought alongside colonists in the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, the British felt it was fair that the colonists help pay the debt, so they passed legislation that implemented a series of taxes in the colonies, which angered the colonists. The Revolution timeline below depicts some of the acts that led up to the Revolution. Taxation. Colonists argued that it was unjust for the British Parliament to pass the Stamp Act because the colonists had no representation in Parliament. They felt that only their own colonial assemblies could levy taxes. The Stamp Act taxed anything printed on paper, i.e. newspapers, legal documents, decks of cards, and any other item that was printed on paper were taxed. In response to the Stamp Act, the colonists held the Stamp Act Congress in October 1765 where Patrick Henry introduced resolutions to the Congress that stated the American colonies should only be taxed by their own legislature, not one that is thousands of miles away. Henry argued against taxation without representation, which became a popular colonial slogan among the colonists who were outraged by British taxes. The phrase can be traced back to the political activist and lawyer James Otis who spoke out against British policies in 1761 and stated that taxation without representation is tyranny. Legislation. In 1767, Parliament passed the Townshend Acts that taxed glass, lead, tea, paint, and other items. Colonists argued that this was unfair and boycotted the acts. The colonists continued to argue for no taxation without representation, and resentment of British policies across the colonies increased, turning colonists against Britain's heavy-handed rule. Escalating tensions. By 1770, colonists were angry about the taxes and other acts that the British had placed upon them, especially since they had no representation in Parliament to address the issues. In addition, British troops had been sent to enforce tax collections, and Bostonians were appalled at the British occupation of their town. Furthermore, some of the British troops had taken second jobs in the colonies. Therefore, the colonists felt those jobs had been taken from them and the colonists took out their frustrations on the British troops on March 5. That evening British soldier, Private Hugh White, was standing guard at the custom house where colonists gathered and began yelling insults and threats at White, which led White to strike a colonist with the bayonet of his gun. This, in turn, led to colonists throwing snowballs and rocks at White, who then called in reinforcements. A chaotic scene developed with aggressive colonists hitting the soldiers until shots were fired, resulting in 5 colonists being killed and others wounded. The Boston Massacre was one of the events on the road to Revolution timeline, as colonial propaganda portrayed the events of the Boston Massacre as the fault of the British troops. The troops were shown as a well-equipped army that assaulted innocent, harmless, and unarmed colonists. Patriots used the Boston Massacre to gain support for the fight against British oppression and colonial independence. In 1773, Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty decided to raid a British ship that was stocked with tea. This resulted in another one of the events leading to the American Revolution, the Boston Tea Party. During the Boston Tea Party, colonists disguised themselves as Native Americans and dumped over 300 tea chests overboard. This resulted in a huge loss of money for the British, which resulted in the British punishing the colonists for their actions with the Coercive Acts. The coercive acts included a series of legislation, some of which is discussed below. Boston Port Bill shut down Boston Harbor until the colonists paid back what was owed due to the loss of tea. It also fined Boston for the Boston Tea Party. Government Bill further limited colonial power by giving more powers to the royal governor. Administration of Justice Act moved trials from the colonies to Britain. Quartering Act required towns and villages to provide housing to British troops. The Declaration of Independence. By 1774, the colonists were ready to officially cut all ties with Britain. The Continental Congress met and discussed the issue of independence. Thomas Jefferson was chosen to be the main author of the document that would officially declare to the world the independence of America, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence largely consisted of a list of grievances the colonists had concerning the British Parliament and largely, the King. The Declaration explained to the world that the King had unfairly taxed the colonists and sent troops to occupy their towns, among other things. The last paragraph of the Declaration states that America is declaring independence and proclaiming itself free of British rule. A Declaration of Independence timeline is listed below. January 1776 Thomas Paine published the pamphlet Common Sense, in which he argued that the colonists needed to declare independence from Britain. June 7, 1776 Richard Henry Lee addressed the idea of independence in the Continental Congress. June 28, 1776 The draft of the Declaration of Independence is debated in Congress. July 2, 1776 The Congress voted for independence. July 4, 1776 The Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Battle of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Trenton. The slogan, "The shot heard round the world," was used to describe the Battle of Lexington and Concord, since this was marked the beginning of the American Revolution on April 19, 1775. The event started with the British troops leaving Boston and marching to the nearby town of Concord to seize colonial weapons that were stored there, resulting in a minor battle. Paul Revere and other members of the Sons of Liberty rode through the night and warned of the impending British troop advancement. When the troops arrived in Lexington, a battle broke out that resulted in several colonial deaths. The British then moved on to Concord to seize the weapons. Since those in Concord had been given advance warning of the British troops' intentions, the colonists had amassed a large militia of nearly 400 men. The troops and colonists exchanged fire and the battle ended with the troops retreating to Boston. The Battle of Lexington and Concord was an important event in the American Revolution, as it was the first real battle between the colonists and the British. Some of the Loyalists, those who remained loyal to Britain and did not seek independence, aided the British. The Loyalists joined the British as they marched through the night and served as guides through the unknown terrain. Loyalists also attempted to play a part in the Battle of Trenton. On Christmas night, December 1776, George Washington led his troops across the icy Delaware River in a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. Loyalists had gone to Trenton to warn British troops that an attack was imminent, but the troops thought that was foolishness and paid no attention to the warning, resulting in success for Washington. Catching the opposing side off guard, Washington and his army captured troops and supplies. The battles of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Trenton gave the Patriots 2 wins in the North.